Greetings everyone, this is Chris from OverclockersClub. Today we have not one but two cases from Zalman to look at. We have the Z11 Neo and the Z9 Neo. They're both mid-tower cases, so let's get them out of the boxes and see what they look like. Now we'll talk about the Z11 Neo, and even though it's a mid-tower case just like the Z9, it's shaped a little differently. If you recall, the Z9 was more conservative, squared off, rectangular, but the Z11, we've got a little different approach here. We've got this contoured, curved surface, we've got some louvers across the top, we have these protrusions on either side, and there's actually a little cooling fan in either side of these protrusions. So we'll pop one of these off and take a look at that here in a little bit. But we'll also do the same thing that we did with the Z9. We'll look at the exterior features of the case, and then we'll flip it around and pop the panels off and take a look at the inside. Looking at the front of the Z11, we have a single optical drive bay, which is hidden behind this little door that pops up and snaps into position there. We also have a brushed aluminum finish. This is much darker in color than what we saw in the Z9. And we also have a horizontal grain to the brushing, whereas the Z9 had a vertical grain to it. Now the other thing we notice, we have these protrusions, and we have across the top, we'll look at it now, we have this recessed, and it has a very high gloss to it. Let's see if I can get you a better look. This recessed pocketed area, I suppose you could put flash drives in there, maybe your car keys, but it does have a very high gloss finish to it. Our power button is front and center here, and on either side we have our USB ports. They're separated. The Z9 had them all lined up on one side, but we actually have the USB 2.0 ports on the left, we have our USB 3.0 ports on the right with our reset button, and then we have our headphone and microphone jack here toward the back corner. Now what I like about this, we have these sort of a frosted color, these plastic louvers here, and the air can come out through these louvered areas. That's where your exhaust air for the top hot exhaust fan air pushes it out the top. We have a meshed panel back here that is also made to assist with the hot exhaust air inside the case to facilitate that exiting. And we'll take a look at the side here. Now we have a window here that protrudes out a little further than the Z9. It was about a 1/4 inch. This is probably closer to a 1/2 inch. And it also has the same smoked appearance to it, so it's not completely clear. Rolling around to the back of the case, we also have a 120mm rear exhaust fan and the opening for the motherboard I/O panel that pops in there. The Z11 actually has a couple of grommets for external water cooling, which we did not have on the Z9. We also have the same 7 PCIe expansion slots, a vented section here to allow fresh air in and out of the case, and at the bottom we have our opening for our power supply. Let's swing it around here and look at the side. Again, the back side here, the side panel is solid. We don't have a window. We do have this protrusion area that mirrors the same protrusion on the windowed side. And we'll take a look at the bottom of the case. And this one's set up a little differently than the Z9. The Z11 here we have our rubber feet, just like we did on the Z9, and the rubber feet are nice to keep from scratching your floor. And again, we have about 3/4 inch of offset here to allow fresh air to circulate underneath the case. And this is your filter for your power supply intake. And again, these get very dirty in a fairly short period of time. So you want to keep an eye on that so you don't restrict airflow to your power supply. Now, we also have a filter panel here that is for a rear case fan, and we have holes here for a 120 or a 140mm bottom fan to bring air in from the bottom of the case and push it up inside. So this filter panel snaps in and out for easy cleaning. Now we will go ahead and get the top popped off and the front fascia popped off and the side panels removed so we can see what's going on. inside the Z11. I've already removed the thumb screws to secure the panels, so we'll just pop the panels off now. And like I talked about earlier, we have a little small 80mm fan, and its purpose is to pull air from inside the case. And I initially thought it was exhausting it through these mesh panels, but actually, if we look right in here, we have some slots. So this fan here is pulling air from inside the case and pushing it out here on the side and not the front. The front mesh panels here actually are for the intake for the front fan, so it draws air in through these side vents and pushes it into the case. Now there are a couple of screws that hold this. I wanted to see what this pod looked like if we remove it. And there were a couple of screws. I already took them out to make it a little faster here. And we have four little tabs that we pop out, and that takes this cover off. You can see where the slots are for the air to pass through. And then we look here, and it's really quite simple. We just have a little 80mm fan there, and its job is to pull the air out of the case and help keep things cool. So we'll set this off to the side and keep going on the inside. Now we have two hard drive cages here, and these are removable. So you could remove these if you have an extra long video card. Each one of these cages holds 3 of these little plastic toolless hard drive trays, and it also has 4 little holes so you can mount an SSD or a solid state drive in these as opposed to a regular spindle drive. So that allows us to have up to 6 drives that insert here. And on the back, we actually have a bonus. We have a mounting provision here in the vented area there is to allow airflow for a solid state drive. And an additional bonus on top of the bonus, and it's a little hard to see, we have our optical drive support trays here. And even though the case is really set up for a single optical drive, we do have mounting provisions in here for additional solid state drives. So you could put 2 more solid state drives in here if you wanted to. Now, looking at the back of the case, the back plane, this one is only set up for an ATX and a micro ATX. It's not really set up for a mini ITX like the Z9 was. We have a generous opening here in the back of the motherboard tray to access any motherboard cooling if you need to do that. We have a single 120mm LED fan in the front, and we have another LED fan at the top here. Now, unlike the Z9 that used Molex connectors for everything, we have 3-pin plugs here for these 2 fans. Now let's pop this back panel off. And again, we have the same 80mm fan and the same configuration on the back panel as we did on the windowed side panel. 120mm rear exhaust fan. Now, this front fan has the Molex connector. So again, I'm a little confused why we would have the mixing of Molex and the regular 3-pin plugs. The good thing is, I suppose if you have a power supply and you're limited on Molex connectors, you only need 1 here, so we're doing a little better in that regard. The back of the motherboard tray, we seem to have a little less room than we had on the Z9. It's a little more shallow, so your cables might be pushed in there a little more snugly. We have the nice opening here. We don't have the grommeted openings that we had on the Z9, but we have 3 very large rectangular openings on the side here for cable pass-through, and then a very large one here at the bottom. Now, let's flip it around to get the top cover off and see what's going on there. All right, now this one is retained by the power switch, so we got to be a little careful there. If we look here, we do have mounting provisions for 140mm fans. Even though it only comes with a single 120mm fan, we can put 2 140s, which gives us the option for a 240 or a 280mm radiator at the top here, and we have a decent amount of offset here for that. And this is the area where your optical drives, you can access those if you need to get into the top. Now let's go ahead and see if the front fascia comes off as easily. And it does. Again, it's retained by some wires, so we got to be a little careful that we don't drop anything. And we can see the mesh area here. This is where the intake comes in from the front fan. Swing it around here. Now, we have, I like this feature here, we have a very nice mesh frame here that contains the filters. So this is very easy to pop off, clean, and pop right back on. And we look at our mounting provisions for the front here. We have a single 120 millimeter fan that's included. We have space for another 120 millimeter fan. You are going to be limited though. You can't use 140 millimeter fans. We don't have any mounting holes for it. If you did want to put a front radiator in there, you are going to be forced to remove your hard drive cages because there's just not enough room in this area here to do anything fancy with radiators. You pull these cages out, you have the option then you can go to a 120 single radiator, or you can go to a 240 millimeter radiator in the front. So we will go ahead and get this together. Forgot to talk about the instructions here. We have our user's manual, we have our standard hardware screws and offsets for our motherboard installation. But something that's a little different here is a lot of times when you put your power supply in, the cable that runs up to supply the CPU with power, sometimes it's short, so you really stretch it and it's really tough to get in there. So for this particular case, they've included an extension cable just for that purpose. So that's a really nice feature. So we'll go ahead and get this thing back together, get the motherboard in it, and we can start looking at how it behaves thermally. Now we have the Z11 all assembled and we'll be ready to do our thermal testing here shortly. Let's look at the top 120 millimeter LED cooling fan there. You can see the blue LED light peeking through the frosted louvers there. Now we do only have one fan, and there is room for two, so it would really look nice if we had two LED fans in there. And looking down into the case, we have the Noctua D14 cooler. We have a little more room on the side panel here since the window protrudes out a little bit, so we're not quite as close to touching the termination points. And looking down in the front of the case, we have the blue 120 millimeter LED fan there. Now looking across the front of the case here, we have the blue power light, and then you'll see a little red flicker of the hard drive activity light. And then when we look down here at one of these side pods, and you can see a little bit of the blue front fan there, you can see that through both of the front side pods. So we'll go ahead and get the thermal testing started. The only other comment I want to make is that during the assembly I did have to take out one of the hard drive cages to make room for some of the extra cables I had with my power supply. If I used a modular power supply, I would have had a little more room since there are cables that you can disconnect and not use at all. So we'll get this going and see what the temperatures look like. This one here, the Z11, like we said, we have a single 120 millimeter exhaust fan up here at the top, and we have a single 120 millimeter intake fan down here at the bottom. So we're not moving quite as much air. Again, if we added a second fan at the top and we added a second fan in the front, I have no doubt that this case would give similar numbers in terms of cooling. Now we also have a little deeper, a little more of a protrusion on the side window, therefore we've got a little more clearance where the Noctua cooler is, where on the Z9 we didn't have as much clearance. It did just fit, but here we've got a little more room. On this case, I do like the louvered top. I do like the way the USB ports are positioned on top also. I like the way these side pods stick out. It kind of adds a little different shape to the case, although it doesn't look like they move an enormous amount of air. So the Z11 here is coming in also in the $69 price range. I've seen some rebates on it also, $10 off, so it's coming in around $59, which I think is a really nice price for this case. The prices do overlap between the Z9 and Z11, so you can get them for basically the same amount of money. The other thing that I didn't like about the Z11 is behind this panel it was a little shallower. We didn't have as much room for our cables from our power supply. Therefore, cable routing, cable management was a little more of a problem. I actually had to take the one of the hard drive cages out so that I had enough room to stick the cables. If you use a modular power supply, I think that's going to be more important with the Z11 so that you don't have as many spare cables floating around inside the case. So, if you want to check the website, we can see what the thermals look like. Again, this is Chris from OverclockersClub, and thanks for watching.